Imagine what it would be like to shrink yourself to the size of an atom or a molecule. You look all around you and you see these tiny little gas molecules darting about. You can play 3D Tetris, taking small drug molecules and figure out how they fit into bigger protein molecules. Your team has also shrunk by about 1 billion times. Maybe the size of Ant-Man? And you're on a molecular mission together. This isn't fantasy, this is actually what my business did 10 years ago. Now imagine that you did all of that inside of VR and it actually assessed your understanding of science. No more 2-hour chemistry exams, sat at a desk. As Sarah Beeny once told me, I'm sure those of you in the UK know who Sarah Beeny is, if science had been like this, I would have loved it. And don't we want more people to love science? This is just one of many use cases of spatial intelligence. At least that last part of it is. Hello, I'm Dr. Becky Sage, and this is episode 3 of my deep dive into Fei Fei Li and her startup, World Labs. Today we're going to look into the formation of that $5 billion company, the motivation behind it, and the technology that's helping it to rise. You can go back and watch episode 1 and 2 to find out how Fei Fei Li became one of the most respected people in the AI space and how she positioned herself to be the founder of a big Silicon Valley startup. Here's a very quick recap in case you don't want to go back and watch those other videos, but you definitely should. I recommend them highly. We talked about Fei Fei Li's academic origins, her love for science and maths, being obsessed with the idea of computer vision, how she cemented herself as that world leader in AI through ImageNet, and how she brought together the power thruple that is data, GPUs, and neural networks. We also discussed how she started to develop a reputation for becoming an ethical voice in AI. Before we get totally stuck in, if this type of thing is something that you're interested in, and especially if you've made it all the way to part 3, make sure you subscribe. This is a brand new channel, and my first goal is a small but mighty one, to reach a teeny tiny 100 subscribers. Don't you want to say you were here at the beginning? I know you do. So let's look at the origin of World Labs. Visual interrogation has always been the domain of Fei Fei Li. To me, it makes a lot more sense than the language-driven LLMs that we're so used to talking about in AI in 2026. Me personally, I'm a big picture thinker after all, and as somebody who loves the multidimensional worlds described by physics and inhabited by humans, why be tied to the single dimension of a language model? So in the early part of her career, Fei Fei Li was working on ImageNet, and other related work was to do with kind of 2D static imagery. She also has published papers to do with video content, so moving to that 2D dynamic content, adding that time element in. Then at some point around about 2015 to 2017, she and I were both doing similar things again. And just like we'd both been teenage girls obsessed with physics and maths at a very similar time, albeit at very different scales. I was leading a startup building 3D visualizations of dynamic atoms and molecules, and she was looking at modeling genomes. Yes, I do feel inadequate. Let's move on. The healthcare work that is described in her book, and we touched on in the last episode, is also somewhere where she started to include spatial modeling. And again, this was happening around about this time, kind of mid to late 2010s. And so it makes a lot of sense that Fei Fei Li and other people working in this space, including some of my colleagues at the University of Bath, shout out to them, could see a different, more 3 or 4D model of AI developing. Finally, on May the 3rd, 2024, Reuters exclusively reported that Fei Fei Li, director of Stanford High had started a spatial intelligence company. Fei Fei Li at the time said, "The pursuit of visual and spatial intelligence has been the North Star guiding me since I entered the field. It's why I spent years building ImageNet. It's why my academic lab at Stanford has spent the last decade combining computer vision with robotic learning." So even though World Labs was first announced in May 2024, it had started a few months earlier, and it initially started in stealth mode. They gave very little away. World Labs was founded in January 2024 by 4 co-founders. Fei Fei Li, of course, Justin Johnson, Christoph Lasner, and Ben Mildenhall. The company was created to develop 3D environment generation with real-time simulation capability. This was the field that Fei Fei Li had described as spatial intelligence. So just a little bit on the co-founders. I'm not going to dive into them too much. There isn't so much information out there about them, and actually this exploration has ended up being largely about Fei Fei Li's journey, so maybe I'll save them for another time. But they all come from a well-respected research background. Justin Johnson is a computer vision researcher. He was a former PhD student of Fei Fei Li. He spent time at Meta and the University of Michigan, building out his research career and a strong reputation. But he came back together with Fei Fei Li after they both realized that their research interests were converging. Christoph Lasner also brings expertise, but his are in 3D graphics. These are expertise that he developed at Meta Reality Labs and Epic Games. He'd also previously developed Pulsar, which was a 3D renderer that laid the groundwork for a technique called Gaussian splatting, which is something that the founders of World Labs talk about a lot. It's a technique that they use to create these 3D spaces. And then finally, Ben Mildenhall, who was previously at Google Research, was the co-creator of NeRF, which stands for Neural Radiance Fields. This is a method for recreating photorealistic 3D scenes. So the initial valuation of World Labs, 200 million, which when I think of all the startups that I work with and how they're really struggling to get their initial 300k and that whole catch-22, no product, no revenue, it just goes to show several things here. Number one, the massive reputation Fei Fei Li and the team have already built up before they even started this business. The kind of vision and quality of the technology, at least in the eyes of the investors, but also that access to money and partners, which was much easier for them to come by than many of the individuals that I work with. Of course, we have a slightly different risk appetite in the UK as well, which is something I've already mentioned in this series. According to TechCrunch, it only took until August, September of that year, 2024, for World Labs to be valued at $1 billion. So unicorn status very, very quickly, pre-product, and September of 2024 was when Fei Fei Li and the team finally announced what they were actually doing, and at this point it was reported that they were worth over $1 billion, and they had received a total of $230 million in funding. A lot of big names were part of their funding rounds, including Andreessen Horowitz, Radical Ventures, Ashton Kutcher, Adobe Ventures, AMD Ventures. Former Google CEO Eric Schmidt was also one of the investors. Now, Radical Ventures are actually particularly interesting to me because they have a responsible AI framework, and they write aspects of responsible AI into their investment terms. Now, these type of clauses are hard to uphold as a company grows, as shares get diluted, but it does show some intent. Radical Ventures also have a framework that other investors can use to do due diligence on their companies, looking through the lens of ethical investment into AI. So I think that this is brilliant, and I intend to do another video, it might be a short, on this framework. And I know of investors in the UK who are looking into this framework and how they're going to use it with their companies as well. So at this stage, with World Labs, Google became the main compute partner. That's probably not a surprise. There were a couple of Google-related investors, and obviously Fei Fei Li had her relationships with Google from when she worked there. So in terms of what World Labs actually does, they launched a first product or a first demonstrator in December of 2024. This was essentially just generating 3D scenes from a single image. And you know, we've seen somewhat similar things from other companies, but it's really important with World Labs to understand that their goal is spatial intelligence. It's not just about creating something that looks a certain way or that you can walk through in a certain way. It's about creating environments that can be interrogated. And I'll come on to some of the use cases in a minute. So when this gets really interesting is when they launch Marble. So despite having spent decades in research and some time around the tech business scene, Fei Fei Li and the team are fairly new to the startup game. And it's clear that in these early stages, they're doing what all founders have to do: figure out product market fit and show some kind of market traction. The only difference here is that they had hundreds of millions of dollars to do it. Honestly, I'm like, this makes my first 80K look very different. Of course, I didn't have decades of research and a world-renowned reputation behind me when I did that. The strategy that they had with the launch of Marble is twofold. It's to put a product out there, and in this case, it's a 3D image generator, which can create 3D worlds. And you can use either text or image inputs to generate these worlds. You can also edit them once they have emerged. But they also wanted to make sure that that first product was useful for the direction of travel. And this is a conversation I have a lot with the founders I work with, which is, yes, you want to hit certain milestones, but how does each thing that you're doing help lead you towards that longer term goal? What you don't really want is things that end up being a divergence and then you're not able to get back on track and you've spent a lot of money, you've invested a lot, and you're not actually going in the direction of travel. So this is really what they're attempting to do with Marble. So in November 2025, Marble was launched. They describe Marble as a large world model that can reconstruct, generate, and simulate 3D worlds from text, videos, or coarse 3D layouts. This allows users to move through this 3D environment, edit, and inhabit the worlds that they create. Marble was made available across 4 pricing tiers, from a free plan, which gives you 4 world generations, to a professional plan at $95 per month, which gives you commercial rights and rights to export. You can export to all sorts of different platforms, including Unreal, Unity, engines that are used to design 3D models. So I've tried playing with Marble, and the UI and the UX is not great. Justin and Fei Fei Li both talk about this openly on a podcast, and they admit they need some product people on this team. Now, while at initial look, it's not immediately clear how this is different from things that already exist, from games engines, from simulation engines that do run in 3D space. That's the type of thing that we were doing. This is a step towards some advances, and Justin's blog on the architecture, which you can find on the World Labs website, does start to be able to explain this a little bit further, because the emphasis here is on machine learning. A very interesting question here that they're trying to solve is, can a machine predict what will happen next, even without humans giving them a set of rules, purely by learning from training material, and training material that is unrelated to the environments you're trying to create. They actually posed very interesting questions themselves, which was, can it learn physics not by being taught the rules explicitly, but through observation? Because after all, if you think about it, this is what we do as humans. We inherently learn the basic rules of physics as very young children, babies, toddlers. When we're learning to walk, we learn the hard lesson of the rules of gravity, and thank God that we're wearing nappies as we fall on our butts over and over again. We play with cars and learn about forces and realize that the more force we put into it, the faster it will go. force is mass times acceleration. We also learn things as advanced as conservation of momentum as we play things like conkers. Now, we might not be able to explain those equations or write them down as concepts or know the language that is associated with it, but we inherently know what is going on. We know that if we push something off a high surface, it will fall to the floor. And that's what's going to happen every single time. It's not every now and again just going to magically hover in the air and then fall to the floor, kind of Wile E. Coyote style from Roadrunner. Even more fascinating, if an AI could start to learn, and if there's true 3D machine learning going on, if a machine can perceive the world around it in a 3D or 4D way, would it even come up with the same set of physics equations that we have? Anyway, that's going a little bit off topic, but that is a question that World Labs would like to be able to answer. But it also obviously sounds like an incredibly academic question, unlike the core pitch of World Labs. And these are the parts that have attracted the big investment. Vision has long been a cornerstone of human intelligence, but its power emerged from something even more fundamental. Long before animals could nest, care for their young, communicate with language, or build civilizations, the simple act of sensing quietly sparked an evolutionary journey towards intelligence. This is what Fei Fei Li said in her manifesto, her World Labs manifesto on Substack at the end of 2025. Of course, that will be linked below. So Fei Fei Li has a really strong belief and vision. She can see the value of AI having spatial intelligence, which is the ability to visualize, understand, and mentally manipulate objects, dimensions, and physical spaces. She has said before that she doesn't think AGI, or artificial general intelligence, is possible without it. On a side note, she also says she doesn't really understand why the term AGI exists. It's just a marketing term because AI means the same thing as AGI. And this is important because can anything really be deemed intelligent if it can't perceive the world around it? Because right now, LLMs only understand the context of the world by being fed information secondhand. It then gives back information also in language, although some of that language is obviously code, which has the capability to do things. So the Cambrian explosion for robots is Fei Fei Li's North Star. It also sounds really terrifying, and like it certainly needs to be governed well as a technology. And as this is what World Labs is essentially here to do, is that governance happening inside the walls of the business? I'm going to dig into that a little bit more in future episodes, especially as we start to look at indications that maybe that governance isn't going on behind closed doors. So Fei Fei Li is obviously not the only one who is excited about the idea of the Cambrian explosion for robots. Her founding team are also really obsessed with some of the technologies that exist and that are bringing World Labs to reality. There are also other people outside of World Labs who are pioneering the development of different world models, i.e. models that generate 3D spaces and predict the next state of that space, or that virtual space, that system. SD Orion at Eka Ventures has written a really great Substack on this, and again, I will link that below. So other examples include Google DeepMind's Project Genie, Yann LeCun's JEPA, and Yann LeCun is really the person who is most known for working specifically on this for the, a very long period of time. And then there's NVIDIA's Cosmos. These are all examples of world models. So this is something that the biggest names are betting on, if you hadn't already got that from the $1 billion that World Labs have got into them. And obviously her investors are bought in too. In February of 2026, investors actually led by Autodesk, and including again NVIDIA, AMD, Andreessen Horowitz, and several others, invested $1 billion at a valuation of $5 billion. But what are they really investing in? What's the vision? What's the potential applications? There are several things that World Labs are ultimately targeting, but they do have some use cases that they are already working on. So here's some of the most tangible examples. Probably the easiest one to understand, I think the one that is definitely one of the early use cases, is training of robots. Obviously, robots or embodied AI. We always have to have like these new names so people sound smart and other people have to keep up with it. People have to keep up with it. Even the Google definition, okay? Like, embodied AI is the integration of artificial intelligence into physical or virtual bodies, enabling machines to perceive, reason, and act autonomously in the real world. A robot! Anyway, so yeah. So researchers have already used Marble to generate 3D environments that then allow for robot manipulation training. This particular one was used to train a robotic arm. It can also be used to scale the evaluation of robots. So if you imagine as robots are going through a testing process, or maybe there are certain failures that you're looking out for, if you can put them into a 3D world model, then you can understand what is going on. You can track and maybe create real-time feedback. Of course, like, we include some of the case studies that are really common in virtual reality as well. So architects and interior designers use Marble to let architects step inside their own environments. Now, a lot of what seems to be going on here is not really much of a step change from what happened in a VR space, and in fact, Marble is still static at the moment as well. But what I believe is going on here is that all of these different environments that are being built, this is all test data, right? This is all, we're creating these environments, and these environments are going to be used to train future world models. Film production and VFX are also applications that are already using Marble, including the World Lab's own launch video. They allow artists to control camera movements with a lot of precision inside these 3D generated worlds. Now, I'm probably going to say this again a little bit later, but I'd really love to know if you've used technology like this as somebody who's working in VFX or game design. Does this help? Is this something that allows you to do better work, to help bring more of your ideas to life? Or is this the type of AI involvement that we don't necessarily want in the creative sector? And then there's also many use cases in education. As I said, certainly I understand lots of VR and immersive environment use cases in education. Things that have already happened is a partnership with Eon Reality. Now, I haven't found much specific here yet. All I know is that they're bringing spatial intelligence and AI to classrooms and corporate learning environments, and haven't found any outcome data, and there's nothing that exists at scale yet from World Labs in this space. Now, I spent 10 years trying to find an effective business model for virtual reality in the classroom, and it was very hard. Even I couldn't justify why schools would spend very limited budgets on this over some of the other things that they needed to spend their budgets on. Now, I also did not have $1 billion to invest in getting this to a place where we could find what that product market fit looks like. Now, one thing I can say is that we did see extremely positive educational outcomes. I mean, it might not sound like much, but when you see a student come into the classroom and be like, oh, is it science again today? And then within about 30 seconds be like, whoa, this is amazing. What happens when this happens? And why is that doing that? And getting curious, asking questions, like, that's what we want in young minds, right? Honestly, when I say I saw this hundreds of times when we were out and about doing our testing, that's no exaggeration. And honestly, I think if anything, it might even be harder to get these things into the classroom now than it was 10 years ago. And because I think there's such a massive backlash around any kind of devices in the classroom. But unfortunately, a Montessori brick can't really show you how molecules work. And that's just one example. I've already mentioned in the intro that for me, the really exciting part of this is around assessing differently. We all know that exams only measure like a certain type of intelligence and that some people really do not thrive in those kind of environments, it's not necessarily a good measure of how this person is going to be able to flourish or not in the outside world. And having different ways to assess using spatial intelligence, for me, is a really exciting application. Is it worth it? There's many different kind of value equations that need to be done around that. One thing I do know is that there are many hurdles that need to be overcome if these kind of technologies are going to be put into a classroom in particular, because these are vulnerable young minds. We should not be haphazard about how we do this. Even once it's technically and financially viable to do this, what are the risks? But also, what are the perceived risks? You know, steamrolling tech into a classroom has always been met with major backlash. Now, other applications of World Labs which have been discussed but not yet deployed in any way include autonomous vehicles, scientific discovery. Now, this has been cited as a long-term goal, and according to the internet, there are currently no use cases around this. Now, again, we actually did make a use case for this, and we tested it, and we have a paper that shows that there is a peer-reviewed research paper that shows that there is value in it. I personally think that was around about 2017 that was published. So things have moved on a lot since then, and that use case may not stand anymore. But you know, this video is making me think I have some transferable skills from my startup after all. And not just understanding the hazards of the founder journey. And then the other sector, of course, which has been referenced many times, is healthcare. I certainly see Marble going down the route of helping with healthcare applications, Marble or future World Labs projects and products. As of mid-2026, World Labs has very early revenue. They've got about 60 employees and one commercial product. They have a very ambitious roadmap, and they span several sectors: robotics, scientific discovery, etc., all of which I've just described. Now, it's really not clear if they're getting much public revenue from Marble, but I assume partnerships might be bringing in some revenue and building some use cases as they go along. They specifically mentioned a Sony partnership, which is the one that they used to build that World Labs video using their own Marble product. So I'm sorry if this video has been a little bit self-indulgent. It's been really funny doing this research, and I really did not expect it to happen. I didn't think that the work that I'd done previously was in any way related to anything that the godmother of AI might be doing. Now, I'm not suggesting I'm playing on that level at all, but it is interesting to look back and see that maybe I sold myself and company short a little bit in terms of how I thought about it. Maybe that's the British way. Like, we were able to build 3D spaces. We were able to have multiple people in those spaces. Yes, the simulations were built on physics. We didn't have the system learning the physics for itself. But it was able to be dynamic, to react in real time, to react at a distance as well. We could do this in the cloud. We could have people in different locations interacting with one another. The system wasn't learning. We hadn't built that spatial intelligence part in, but it was responding to inputs by a user. And I think I need to give a shout out to the technical team that was at Interactive Scientific and led by Phil Chu, the CTO in the company, because this was a tiny startup. I mean, we had less than $500,000 initial investment. We did get 100,000 in cloud credits from Oracle. Like, looking back, I think, hang on a second, why was I not thinking about the energy usage of this thing? Because let's be real, I wasn't at that time. And I think that this is what we've got to appreciate when it comes to founders. They become very, very focused on the task at hand. And it's hard enough just to go from step 1 to step 2. I would hope with the background that Fei Fei Li has, she already has so much of the knowledge, so many resources that allow her to build in really important principles to the company that she's building, ensuring that the positive impacts can be realized without destructive negative impacts. I used to say back in our business, like, oh, if only we had 10 million, imagine what we could do. How naive of me. But anyway, she has $1 billion. Yes, imagine what that can do from a technical perspective, from a marketing perspective, but also imagine what that could do if you set aside some of that to ensure that you're building responsibly as you build this business. So far in this series, we've discussed the research foundations of World Labs, but what happens when Silicon Valley and ethics collide? We're going to look into that in episode 4. When it comes to the controversies and certain patterns. This will be focused around Fei Fei Li and World Labs, but if you want to go and watch any of the old videos, there are some here. And if you're still here at the end of episode 3 and you're loving the story of Fei Fei Li so far, where do you think this is going to go next? Do you think she's going to live up to the position of godmother of AI or the conscience of AI? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you next week for episode 4.